Let's start with George Kennan, who was the former US ambassador to the Soviet Union during the height of the Cold War. George Kennan was the architect behind the Cold War strategy of containing the Soviet Union, but warned against NATO expansion in this groundbreaking 1996 New York Times article. 1 year later, George Kennan would sit down with the New York Times for another interview and said this about NATO expansion: "I think it is a tragic mistake. There was no reason for this whatsoever. No one was threatening anybody else. This expansion would make the founding fathers of this country turn over in their graves." That's quite the quote, and it reveals one of the largest problems with the US government. When experts like George Kennan speak out, their advice should be taken. George Kennan is one of the most knowledgeable Americans on Russian affairs. He knew exactly what was at stake with NATO expansion. Even the infamous former Secretary of State and political advisor Gentry Kissinger warned that Ukraine should not join NATO and should carefully avoid hostility towards Russia. In 2014, Kissinger wrote this article for the Washington Post entitled "How the Ukraine Crisis Ends," and his advice was simple: Ukraine should not join NATO, a position I took 7 years ago when it last came up. As this goes to show, the foremost American strategists who worked during the Cold War saw the post-Soviet Union NATO expansion as a grave mistake. But this is where things get very interesting.